Hello, and welcome to Phantom Shadows book reading podcast. Today I will be reading the first of the Lord of the Rings series. If you are interested in purchasing these books, I will leave a link in the description. Because many of you do not consider The Hobbit a part of the original series, I will read The Hobbit last and read the Fellowship of the Ring first. The version of the Lord of the Rings series I will be reading is the 50th anniversary edition available on Kindle and Amazon, along with a number of other retailers. Chapter 1: A Long Expected Party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11st birthday with a special party of magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbleton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years. Ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return, the riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Hobbits of poor and unimportant families. But he had no close friends until some of his younger cousins began to grow up. The youngest of these, and Bilbo's favorite, was young Frodo Baggins. When Bilbo was 99, he adopted Frodo as his heir and brought him to live at Bag End, and the hopes of the Saxville Baggins were finally dashed. Bilbo and Frodo happened to have the same birthday, September 22nd. "You had better come here and live here, Frodo, my lad," said Bilbo one day, "and then we can celebrate our birthday parties comfortably together." At that time, Frodo was still in his tweens, as the hobbits called the irresponsible 20s between childhood and coming of age at 33. There was never much to tell about him until he drowned. "Drowned?" said several voices. They had heard this and many other darker rumors before, of course, but hobbits have a passion for family history, and they were ready to hear it again. "Well, so they say," said the Gaffer. "You see, Dr. Drogo, 33, an important number, and the date of his coming of age. Tongues began to wag in Hobbleton and Bywater, and the rumor of the coming event traveled all over the Shire. The history and the character of Mr. Bilbo Baggins became once again the chief topic of conversation, and the older folk suddenly found their reminiscence in welcome demand. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham McGee, commonly known as the Gaffer. He held forth at the Ivy Bush, a small inn by the Bywater Road, and he spoke with some authority, for he had tended the garden at Bag End for 40 years, and he had helped the old Holman in the same job before that. Now that he was himself growing old and stiff in the joints, the job was mainly carried on by his youngest son, Sam Gamgee. Both father and son were on friendly terms with Bilbo and Frodo. They lived on the hill itself in number 3, Bagshot Row, just below Bag End. A very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo, as I've always said, the Gaffer declared, with perfect truth, for Bilbo was very polite to him, calling Master Hamfast, and consulting him constantly upon the growing of his vegetables, in the matter of roots, especially potatoes. The Gaffer was recognized as the leading authority by all in the neighborhood, including himself. "But what about Frodo that lives with him?" asked old Noakes of Bywater. "Baggins is his name, but he's more than half a brandy buck, they would say. It beats me why any Baggins of Hobbleton would go looking for a wife away there in Buckland, where folks are so queer. And no wonder they're queer," put in Daddy Two-Foot, the Gaffers' next-door neighbor. "If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River and right in the old forest, that's a dark, bad place if half the tales are true." "You're right, Dad," said the Gaffer. "Not that the Brandybucks of Buckland live in the old forest, but they're a queer breed seemingly. They fool about with boats on that big river, and that isn't natural. Small wonder that trouble came of it, I say, but be that as it may, Mr. Frodo is a young hobbit as you would wish to meet, very much like Mr. Bilbo, and in more than looks. After all, his father was a Baggins. A decent, respectable hobbit was Mr. Drogo Baggins. There was never much to tell of him till he drowned." "Drowned?" said several voices. They had heard this and other darker rumors before, of course, but hobbits have a passion for family history, and they were ready to hear it again. "Well, so they say," said the Gaffer. "You see, Mr. Drogo, he married poor Miss Parmelia Brandybuck. She was our Mr. Bilbo's first cousin on the mother's side, her mother being the youngest of the old Took's daughters, and Mr. Drogo was his second cousin, so Mr. Frodo in his first and second cousin, once removed either way, as the saying is, if you follow me. And Mr. Drogo was staying at Brandy Hill with his father-in-law, old Master Gorbodoc, and as he often did after his marriage, him being partial to his victuals, and old Gorbodoc keeping a mighty generous table, and he went out boating on the Brandybuck River, and he and his wife were drowned, and poor Frodo, only a child and all. "I've heard they went out on the water after dinner in the moonlight," said old Noakes, "and it was Drogo's weight as sunk the boat." "And I heard she pushed him in, and he pulled her in after him," said Sandyman the Hobbleton miller. "You shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandyman," said Gaffer, who did not much like the miller. "There isn't much call to go talking of pushing and pulling. Boats are quite tricky enough for those that sit still without looking further for the cause of trouble. Anyway, there was this Mr. Frodo left an orphan and stranded, as you might say, among these queer Bucklanders, being brought up anyhow in Brandy Hall, a regular warren by all accounts, and I hope no harm will come of it. 'Elves and dragons,' I says to him, 'cabbages and potatoes are better for me and for you. Don't go mixing up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble too big for you,' I says to him, and I might say it to others," he added with a look at the stranger and the miller. But the Gaffer did not convince his audience. The legend of Bilbo's wealth was now too firmly fixed in the minds of the younger generation of hobbits. "Ah, but he has likely enough been adding to what he brought at first," argued the miller, voicing common opinion. "He's often away from his home, and look at the outlandish folk that visit him, dwarves coming at night, and the old wandering conjurer Gandalf and all. You can say what you like, Gaffer, but Bag End's a queer place, and its folk are even queerer. And you can say what you like about what you know no more of than what you do of boating, Mr. Sandman," retorted the Gaffer, disliking the miller more than usual. "If that's being queer, then we could do with a bit more queerness in these parts. There's some not far away that wouldn't offer a pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole with golden walls, but they do things proper at Bag End. Our Sam says that one's going to be invited to the party, and there's going to be presents, mark you, presents for all, this very month as is." That very month was September, and as fine as you could ask. A day or two later, a rumor, probably started by the knowledgeable Sam, was spread about that there were going to be fireworks. Fireworks, what is more, such as had not been seen in the Shire for nigh on a century. Not indeed since the old Took died. Days passed, and the day grew nearer. An odd-looking wagon laden with odd-looking packages rolled into Hobbiton one evening and toiled up the hill to Bag End. The startled hobbits peered out of the lamplit doors to gape at it. It was driven by outlandish folks singing strange songs, dwarves with long beards and deep hoods. A few of them remained at Bag End. The second week in September, a cart came in through Bywater from the direction of Brandywine Bridge in broad daylight. An old man was driving it all alone. He wore a tall pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, and a silver scarf. He had a long white beard and bushy eyebrows that stuck out beyond the brim of his hat. Small hobbit children ran after the cart, all throughout Hobbiton and right up the hill. It had a cargo of fireworks, as they rightly guessed, and at Bilbo's front door the old man began to unload. There were great bundles of fireworks of all sorts and shapes, each labeled with a large red G and the elf rune. That was Gandalf's mark, of course, and the old man was Gandalf the wizard, whose fame in the Shire was due mainly to his skill with fires, smokes, and lights. His real business was far more difficult and dangerous, but the Shire folk knew nothing about it. To them he was just one of the attractions at the party, hence the excitement of the hobbit children. "G is for grand," they shouted, and the old man smiled. They knew him by sight, though he only appeared in Hobbiton occasionally and never stopped long. But neither they nor the oldest of the elders had been to one of his fireworks displays. They now belonged to a legendary past. When the old man, helped by Bilbo and some dwarves, had finished unloading, Bilbo gave a few pennies away, but not a single squib or cracker was forthcoming, to the disappointment of the onlookers. "Run away now," said Gandalf. "You'll get plenty when the time comes." Then he disappeared inside with Bilbo, and the door was shut. The young hobbits stared at the door in vain for a while, and then made off, feeling that the day of the party would never come. Inside Bag End, Bilbo and Gandalf were sitting at the open window of a small room, looking out west onto the garden. The late afternoon was bright and peaceful. The flowers glowed red and golden. Snapdragons and sunflowers and nasturtiums trailing all over the turf walls and peeping into the round windows. "How bright your garden looks," said Gandalf. "Yes," said Bilbo, "I am very fond indeed of it, and of all the dear old Shire, but I think I need a holiday." "You mean to go on with your plan, then?" "I do. I made up my mind months ago, and I haven't changed it." "Very well. It is no good saying any more. Stick to your plan, your whole plan. Mind, and I hope it will turn out for the best, for you and the rest of us." "I hope so. Anyway, I mean to enjoy myself on Thursday and have my little joke." "Who will laugh, I wonder?" said Gandalf, shaking his head. "We shall see," said Bilbo. The next day more carts rolled up the hill, and still more carts. There might have been some grumbling about dealing locally, but that very week orders began to pour out of Bag End for every kind of provision, commodity, or luxury that could be obtained in Hobbiton or Bywater, or anywhere in the neighborhood. People became enthusiastic, and they began to tick off the days on the calendar, and they watched eagerly for the postman, hoping for invitations. Before long the invitations began pouring out, and the Hobbiton post office was blocked, and the Bywater post office was snowed under, and voluntary assistant postmen were called for. There was a constant stream of them going up the hill, carrying hundreds of polite variations on "Thank you, I shall certainly come." A notice appeared on the gate at Bag End: "No admittance except on party business." Even those who had or pretended to have party business were seldom allowed inside. Bilbo was busy writing invitations, ticking off answers, packing up presents, and making some private preparations of his own. From the time of Gandalf's arrival, he had remained hidden from view. One morning, the hobbits woke to find the large field south of Bilbo's front door covered with ropes and poles for tents and pavilions. A small entrance was cut into the bank leading to the road, and wide steps and a large white gate were built there. The 3 hobbit families of Bagshot Row, adjoining the field, were intensely interested and generally envied. Old Gaffer Gamgee stopped even pretending to work in this garden. The tent began to go up, and there was a specially large pavilion, so big that the tree that grew in the field was right inside it, and stood proudly near one end at the head of the chief table. Lanterns were hung on all its branches. More promising still, to the hobbit's mind, an enormous open-air kitchen was erected in the north corner of the field. A draught of cooks from every inn and eating-house for miles around arrived to supplement the dwarves and their odd folk that were quartered at Bag End. Excitement rose to its height. Then the weather clouded over. That was on Wednesday, the eve of the party. Anxiety was intense. Then Thursday, September the 22nd, actually dawned. The sun got up, the clouds vanished, flags were unfurled, and the fun began. Bilbo Baggins called it a party, but it was really a variety of entertainments rolled into one. Practically everybody living near was invited. A very few were overlooked by the accident, but as they turned up, all the same, that did not matter. Many people from other parts of the Shire were also asked, and there were even a few from outside the borders. Bilbo met the guests and the additions at the new White Gate in person. He gave away presents to all, and sundry the latter were those who went out again by a back way and came in again by the gate. Hobbits gave presents to other people on their own holidays, not very expensive ones as a rule, and not so lavishly as on this occasion, but it was not a bad system. Actually, in Hobbiton and Bywater, every day in the year was somebody's birthday, so that every hobbit in these parts had a fair chance of at least one present at least once a week. But they never got tired of them. On this occasion, the presents were unusually good. The Hobbiton children were so excited that for a while they almost forgot about eating. There were toys the like of which they had never seen before, all beautiful and some obviously magical. Many of them had indeed been ordered a year before, and it had come all the way from the mountain and from the dale, and were of real dwarf make. When every guest had been welcomed and was finally inside the gate, there were songs, dances, music, games, and, of course, food and drink. There were 3 official meals, lunch, tea, and dinner, or supper, but lunch and tea were marked chiefly by the fact that at those times all the guests were sitting down and eating together. At other times there were merely lots of people eating and drinking, continuously from 11 until 6:30 when the fireworks started. The fireworks were by Gandalf. They were not only brought by him, but designed and made by him, and the special effects, set pieces, and flights of rockets were let off by him. But there was also a generous distribution of squibs and crackers, backs, wrappers, sparklers, torches, dwarf candles, elf fountains, goblin barkers, and thunderclaps. They were all superb. The art of Gandalf improved with age. There were rockets like a flight of scintillating birds, singing with sweet voices. There were green trees, with trunks of dark smoke, their leaves open like a whole spring unfolding in a moment, and their shining branches dropped glowing flowers down upon the astonished hobbits. disappearing with a sweet scent just before they touched their upturned faces. There were fountains of butterflies that flew glittering into the trees. There were pillars of colored fires that rose and turned into eagles of soaring ships, or a phalanx of flying swans. There was a red thunderstorm and a shower of yellow rain. There was a forest of silver spears that sprang suddenly into the air with a yell like an embattled army, and came down again into the water with a hiss like 100 hot snakes. And there was also one last surprise in honor of Bilbo, and it startled the hobbits exceedingly, as Gandalf intended. The lights went out, and a great smoke went up. It shaped itself like a mountain seen in the distance, and began to glow at the summit. It spouted green and scarlet flames. Out flew a red golden dragon, not life-sized, but terribly lifelike. Fire came from its jaws, his eyes glared down. There was a roar, and he whizzed 3 times over the heads of the crowd. They all ducked, and many fell flat on their faces. The dragon passed like an express train, turned a somersault, and burst over Bywater with a deafening explosion. "That is the signal for supper," said Bilbo. The pain and alarm vanished at once, and the prostrate hobbits leaped to their feet. There was a splendid supper for everyone. For everyone, that is, except those invited to the special family dinner party. This was held in the great pavilion with the tree. The invitations were limited to 12 dozen, a number also called by the hobbits one gross, though the word was not considered proper to use of people, and the guests were selected from all the families to which Bilbo and Frodo were related, with the addition of a few special unrelated friends such as Gandalf. Many young hobbits were included and present by parental permission, for hobbits were easy-going with their children in the matter of sitting up late, especially when there was a chance of them getting a free meal. Bringing up young hobbits took a lot of provender. There were many Baggins and Boffins, and also many Tooks and Brandybucks. There were various Grubbs, relations of Bilbo Baggins' grandmother, and various Chubbs, connections of his Took grandfather, and a selection of Burrowses, Bulgers, Bracegirdles, and Brockhouses, Goodbodies, Hornblowers, and Proudfoots. Some of these were only very distantly connected with Bilbo, and some had hardly ever been in Hobbiton before, as they lived in remote corners of the Shire. "My dear Baggins and Boffins," he began again, "and my dear Tooks and Brandybucks and Grubbs and Chubbs and Burrowses and Hornblowers and Bulgers, Bracegirdles, Goodbodies, Brockhouses, and Proudfoots." "Proud feet," shouted an elderly hobbit from the back of the pavilion. His name, of course, was Proudfoot, and where all the 144 guests expected a pleasant feast, though they rather dreaded the after-lunch speech of their host, an inevitable item. He was liable to drag in bits of what he called poetry, and sometimes, after a glass or two, would allude to the absurd adventures of his mysterious journey. The guests were not disappointed. They had a very pleasant feast. In fact, an engrossing entertainment, rich, abundant, varied, and prolonged. The purchase of provisions fell almost to nothing throughout the district in the ensuing weeks, but as Bilbo's catering had depleted the stocks of most of the stores, cellars and warehouses for miles around, that did not matter much. After the feast, more or less, came the speech. Most of the company were, however, now in a tolerant mood, at the delightful stage which they had called filling up the corners. They were sipping their favorite drinks and nibbling at their favorite dainties, and their fears were forgotten.
They were prepared to listen to anything, and to cheer at every full stop. "My dear people," began Bilbo, raising in his place. "Hear, hear, hear," they shouted, and kept on repeating it in chorus, seemingly reluctant to follow their own advice. Bilbo left his place and went and stood on a chair under the illuminated tree. The light of the lanterns fell on his beaming face. The golden buttons shone on his embroidered silk waistcoat. They could all see him standing waving one hand in the air. The other hand was in his trousers pocket. "My dear Baggins and Boffins," he began again, "and my dear Tooks and Brandybucks and Grubbs and Chubbs and Burrowses and Hornblowers and Bolgers, Bracegirdles, Goodbodies, Brockhouses and Proudfoots." "Proud feet!" shouted an elderly hobbit from the back of the pavilion. His name, of course, was Proudfoot, and well merited. His feet were large, exceptionally furry, and both were on the table. "Proudfoots," repeated Bilbo. "Also my good Saxville Baggins, that I welcome back at last to Bag End. Today is my 111th birthday. I am 11 today. Hooray! Hooray! Many happy returns," they shouted, and they hammered joyously on the tables. Bilbo was doing splendidly. This was the sort of stuff they liked, short and obvious. "I hope you are all enjoying yourselves as much as I am." Deafening cheers, cries of yes and no, noises of trumpets and horns, pipes and flutes and other musical instruments. There were, as had been said, many young hobbits present. Hundreds of musical crackers had been pulled out. Most of them bore the mark of Dale on them, which did not convey much to most of the hobbits, but they all agreed they were marvelous crackers. They contained instruments small, but on perfect make and enchanting tones. Indeed, in one corner, some of the young Tooks and Brandybucks, supposing Uncle Bilbo to have finished, since he had plainly said all that was necessary, now got up impromptu orchestra and began a merry dance tune. Master Everard Took and Miss Melilot Brandybuck got on a table with the bells in their hands and began to dance with Spring-a-Ring, a pretty dance, but rather vigorous. But Bilbo had not finished. Seizing a horn from a youngster nearby, he blew 3 loud toots. The noise subsided. "I shall not keep you long," he cried. Cheers from all the assembly. "I have called you all together for a purpose." Something in the way that he said this made an impression. There was almost a silence, and one or two of the Tooks pricked up their ears. "Indeed, for 3 purposes. First of all, to tell you all that I am immensely fond of you all, and that 11 years is too short a time to live among such an excellent and admirable hobbits." Tremendous outburst of approval resounded throughout the crowd. "I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve." This was unexpected and rather difficult. There was some scattered clapping, but most of them were trying to work it out and see if it came to a compliment. Secondly, to celebrate my birthday. Cheers again resounded throughout the crowd. I should say our birthday, for it is, of course, also the birthday of my heir and nephew Frodo. He comes of age and into his inheritance today. Some perfunctory clappery came from the elders, and some loud shouts of "Frodo, Frodo, jolly old Frodo" from the juniors. The Saxville Baggins scowled and wondered what that was meant by coming into his inheritance. Together we score 144. Your members were chosen to fit this remarkable total. One gross, if I may use the expression. No cheers were sounded from the crowd. This was ridiculous. Many of the guests, and especially the Saxville Baggins, were insulted, feeling sure they had only been asked to fill up the required number like goods in a package. One gross indeed, vulgar expression, they thought. It is also, if I may be allowed to refer to ancient history, the anniversary of my arrival by barrel at Escaroth on the Long Lake. Through the fact that it was my birthday slipped my memory on that occasion. I was only 51 then, and birthdays did not seem so important. The banquet was very splendid, however, though I had a bad cold at the time. I remember and could only say thank you very much. I now repeat it more correctly. Thank you very much for coming to my little party. The crowd was obstinate with silence. They all feared that a song or some poetry was now imminent, and they were getting bored. Why couldn't he stop talking and let them drink to his health? But Bilbo did not sing or recite. He paused for a moment. Thirdly, and finally, he said, I wish to make an announcement. He spoke his last words so loudly and suddenly that everyone sat up who still could. I regret to announce that, though, as I said, 21 years is far too short a time to spend among you, this is the end. I am going. I am leaving. Now goodbye.